My parents handed my brother Mason $30,000 for a down payment and called it faith in his future. Then Dad turned to me, his 36-year-old daughter, and said I should rent somewhere nicer before I started pretending I understood real estate. Mom nodded like that was kindness. I smiled, cleared the plates, and drove home in my old sedan with my throat burning. That night, I used my savings to buy my first rental property. Then I bought another, and another. Months later, when Mason smirked and asked which house was mine, I looked at him and said, very, very quietly, "Which one?" To understand why those two words hit my family like a slap, you have to understand the house I grew up in, not the address. That doesn't matter. I mean the feeling of it. My parents' place always smelled like roasted chicken, lemon cleaner, and the kind of coffee my mother kept warming up until it tasted burned. Every Sunday, we sat around the same oak dining table under a chandelier that buzzed when the room got too quiet. Family photos covered the hallway wall, all polished frames and frozen smiles. In almost every picture, Mason stood near the middle. I was usually off to the side. That was my role before I even knew it had a name. Mason was 3 years younger than me, loud in the way people call charming when it comes from a son. He could quit a job and Dad would say he was figuring out his path. He could overdraft his account and Mom would say life was expensive for young people. He could forget birthdays, miss calls, show up late, and somehow still be the one everyone waited for. Me, I was Olivia, the responsible one, the steady one, the daughter who looked like she had it handled, so nobody asked if she was tired. By 36, I had learned how to look beautiful even when I felt invisible. A clean blouse, soft makeup, hair pulled back just right, a smile that said, "Don't worry about me," even when my chest felt tight enough to crack. I managed rental properties for a living, which meant I spent my days dealing with leaking sinks, late payments, broken heaters, and tenants who just wanted someone to answer the phone. I was good at it, but in my father's eyes, I was still just fixing other people's problems. Warren Carver believed success had a certain shape: a man in a crisp shirt, a mortgage, a wife smiling beside him, a backyard big enough for a grill, and Mason, somehow, fit that picture even when he had no savings and a credit score everyone politely avoided mentioning. My mother, Elaine, was softer, which sometimes made it worse. She never laughed at me the way Dad did. She just tilted her head, touched my arm, and said things like, "Honey, we just don't want you taking on too much." But that was the thing. Nobody ever worried Mason was taking on too much. They only worried I was reaching too high, and on one ordinary Sunday night, with gravy cooling on my plate and Mason grinning across the table, they finally said it out loud. Dad cleared his throat before dessert, which was never a good sign. Mason leaned back in his chair with one arm around Claire's shoulders, trying not to smile and failing badly. Mom kept folding and unfolding her napkin, her eyes shiny, like she was about to announce a baby or a miracle. Then Dad reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He slid it across the table to Mason. "For the house," he said. Mason opened it, and his face changed before he even spoke. His mouth fell open. Claire grabbed his wrist. "Dad," Mason said, almost laughing. "Are you serious? 30,000? Dad said, proud enough to glow. "Your mother and I want to help you start the right way." Mom wiped under one eye. "You two deserve a real home, a real home." I looked down at my plate. The chicken had gone cold, the skin soft and greasy under my fork. Across from me, Mason kept staring at the check like he had just been handed a crown. I should have said nothing. That was what I was good at. But something in me, maybe the little girl who once built a whole cardboard town just to make her father proud, lifted her head. "That's amazing," I said. "Congratulations," Mason grinned. "Thanks, Liv." I took a breath. "Actually, I've been looking at properties too. Nothing big. Maybe a small duplex, something I could rent out." The room shifted. Not loudly. Worse. Quietly. Dad blinked at me, then laughed once through his nose. like he thought I was joking and wanted to be polite about it. A duplex, he said. I nodded. I know the rental side. I've been studying financing, maintenance reserves, cash flow. I've saved enough for a down payment if the numbers work. Mason looked down at his mashed potatoes and smirked. Claire didn't say anything, but her eyebrows moved. Mom reached over and patted my hand. Honey, owning property is a lot of responsibility. I know. No, I mean really owning it, Dad said. It's different from collecting rent checks for someone else. The words landed clean. No shouting, no scene. Just a small blade slid between my ribs. I'm not rushing, I said. I've been planning this for a while. Dad leaned back. Olivia, listen to me. You're good at what you do. Nobody is saying you aren't. But investment property is not something you play with because you watched a few videos online. I didn't just watch videos. Mason gave a short laugh. Dad kept going. Before you start pretending you understand real estate, maybe rent somewhere nicer first. Build yourself up slowly. Baby steps. Baby steps. I was 36 years old. Mason had just been handed $30,000 because everyone believed he was ready. I had built my life on paying bills early, saving quietly, and never asking for rescue. And I was being told to rent somewhere like a child getting permission to pick a bedroom poster. I smiled because my face knew the job before my heart did. After dinner, I stood at the sink with my sleeves rolled up, washing plates while the living room filled with laughter. Mason was talking about paint colors. Dad was telling him which neighborhoods would appreciate fastest. Mom was already imagining Thanksgiving at his new house. Then Dad walked into the kitchen for another drink. He stopped beside me. Don't take it personally, he said. I'm trying to protect you from a mistake. I looked at his reflection in the dark window above the sink. You think I'd fail, he sighed. I think some dreams are bigger than the person holding them. The water ran over my hands until my fingers went numb. I turned it off. I dried my hands slowly. Then I drove home, opened my laptop, pulled up the duplex listing I had been studying for 6 weeks, and sent Paige Monroe one message. Make the offer. The next morning, Paige called me before I even finished my coffee. They accepted. I was standing in my apartment kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, staring at a sink full of dishes I had been too tired to wash the night before. They accepted, I repeated. Full offer. $155,000. Inspection is Thursday. For a second, the room tilted. I had imagined this moment 100 times. I thought I would jump, cry, scream. Something. Instead, I sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinet and pressed one hand over my mouth. Because wanting a life is one thing, signing your name under the weight of it is something else. The duplex sat on a tired street on the east side of the city, no exact address worth mentioning, just a row of older homes with chain-link fences, cracked sidewalks, and maple trees pushing their roots through the pavement. The siding needed paint. The porch sagged a little. The upstairs window had a curtain hanging crooked like someone had given up halfway, but the bones were good. That was what the inspector said. The roof had a few years left. The plumbing needed attention. The electrical panel was old, but safe. Nothing glamorous. Nothing easy. But possible. Possible became my favorite word. I used almost $40,000 of my own savings between the down payment, closing costs, and repairs I knew were coming. That money had taken years to build. No vacations, no new car, no cute weekend trips, no designer purse I used to stop and look at through department store glass. Just overtime, leftovers, generic coffee, and a savings account I guarded like oxygen. At closing, the office smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. Paige sat beside me while I signed page after page until my wrist ached. The title officer slid a folder across the table and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Carver. You're officially the owner." Owner. The word did not feel real until I sat in my old sedan afterward with the keys in my palm. They were cold, jagged, ordinary keys. Nothing about them looked powerful, but I could barely breathe. I didn't call my parents. I called Brooke. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me." "I did it," I whispered. There was a sharp silence. Then she screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. That first weekend, I met Ruth Caldwell, the tenant downstairs. She was in her 60s, small and careful, with silver hair pinned behind her ears and a cardigan buttoned all the way up despite the heat. "You're the new landlord?" she asked. I nodded, still not used to the word. She looked past me at the porch light that didn't work. "The last owner said he'd fix things." "I'm not the last owner. I said it before I knew if I could live up to it. So I lived up to it. I replaced the porch light. I hired a plumber for the leaking sink. I cleaned out the basement with gloves, a mask, and more stubbornness than sense. By Sunday night, my back hurt, my nails were ruined, and my checking account looked wounded. But Ruth brought me iced tea in a plastic cup and said, "You came back?" 3 words. That was all. You came back. No one in my family had ever sounded that surprised by me keeping a promise. The duplex brought in about $1,900 a month in rent, after mortgage, insurance, taxes, repairs, and reserves. I cleared around $600, not rich, not magic, but real. The next Sunday, I went to dinner like nothing had changed. Mason talked about hardwood floors. Claire showed Mom pictures of kitchen islands. Dad gave advice like he had personally invented homeownership, and me, I washed the plates again. Only this time, while warm water ran over my hands and laughter spilled from the living room, I had 2 cold keys in my purse. Nobody knew, and for the first time, their not knowing felt less like rejection and more like power. I thought buying the first property would quiet the ache. It didn't. It made me hungrier, not greedy, not reckless, just awake. Every morning before work, I checked listings with one hand around a coffee mug and the other hovering over my calculator. Every night, I studied repairs, financing, rental laws, insurance, vacancy rates. While Mason posted pictures of his new backyard and Claire arranged throw pillows in a living room my parents had helped him buy, I learned how to read inspection reports like they were weather warnings. Property 2 came 9 months later, another duplex, rougher than the first, with a roof that looked tired enough to sigh. The seller wanted $140,000. Paige helped me negotiate it down to $130,000. I used savings, cash flow, and a legal financing structure Karen walked me through twice because I made her explain every line until I understood it. That duplex scared me more than the first. The upstairs unit needed flooring. The gutters were loose. A tenant named Victor Grant had lived downstairs for years and clearly expected nothing from anybody. When I introduced myself, he looked at me through the screen door and said, "You'll disappear too." "No." I said, "I won't." I fixed the gutters. I replaced the flooring. I kept showing up. By spring, Property 2 was bringing in about $650 a month after expenses. Then came the little house near the hiking trails. $185,000, peeling paint, old furniture, bad photos, but perfect location. I turned it into a short-term rental with white towels, a coffee station, framed forest prints, and second-hand furniture I sanded in my parking lot while my neighbors pretended not to stare. That one brought in around $1,100 a month after expenses. Property 4 came slower and smarter, a small duplex for $180,000. Partly through seller financing. It took negotiation, patience, and 3 nights where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father's voice had been right all along, but the numbers worked, so I moved. By the time 30 months had passed, I owned 4 properties worth around $650,000 together. Gross rent was close to $8,000 a month, after mortgage payments, bills, repairs, insurance, taxes, and reserves. I kept roughly $3,000. I still drove the same old sedan, still wore the same blazer, still let my family think I was just managing other people's buildings. Then Jenna Parker called. She was a local reporter doing a story about women building wealth through real estate. She had seen my name in public records and heard about me from a landlord group. "Did your family help you start?" she asked during our interview at a small coffee shop downtown. I looked down at my cup. The lid was warm under my fingers. "No," I said. They didn't think I could. The article came out on a Wednesday morning. By noon, the family group chat was burning. Mom wrote first. "Olivia, is this true? Then Dad, call me. Then Mason. Wait, you own rentals. I stared at the screen in the hallway of Property 3 while fresh towels spun in the dryer behind me. For once, I did not rush to explain myself. Sunday dinner felt different before I even walked in. The house smelled like roast beef and panic. Mom opened the door with red eyes. Dad stood near the dining room, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mason was already at the table, tapping his thumb against his glass. Claire sat beside him, silent. The article was printed in the middle of the table. My face stared up from the page. Dad touched the paper with 2 fingers like it might burn him. Is this accurate? He asked. Yes, 4 properties. Yes, $650,000. In property value, I said. There are loans, there are expenses, but yes. Mom pressed a napkin to her mouth. Why didn't you tell us? I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny in me. I tried once. Dad looked away first. Mason leaned back, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. So what? Liv, you bought a house and suddenly you're some real estate mogul. There it was. One last little shove. One last attempt to make me smaller. I folded my hands in my lap. Mason smirked. Which house is even yours? The chandelier buzzed overhead. The ice in Dad's glass cracked. Mom stopped breathing for half a second. I looked at my brother, the golden boy with the gifted down payment, the new kitchen, the backyard everyone praised like he had built it with his bare hands. And I said, very quietly, which one? Nobody moved. Even Mason's smirk died before it reached his cheeks. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. I own 4, I said. 2 duplexes, 1 short-term rental, and another duplex across town. I bought the first after Dad told me to rent somewhere. I bought the second after you laughed. I bought the third when I realized I was done waiting for this family to believe in me. And I bought the 4th because by then, I believed in myself. Dad's face changed, not all at once, slowly, like a man watching a door close from the wrong side. I never wanted to embarrass you, I said. I never wanted Mason to fail, but I am done sitting at this table while you call his help an investment and my ambition a mistake. Mason looked down. Claire did too. Mom started crying, but this time I did not reach for her hand first. Dad swallowed hard, for the first time in my life. He had no advice, and that silence felt louder than any apology. For a long time, nobody at that table said anything. Dad stared at the article like the words might rearrange themselves into something easier to swallow. Mom cried into a napkin. Mason kept looking at his plate. The way people do when they are hoping shame will pass if they stay still enough. Finally. Dad cleared his throat. We thought Mason needed help, he said. I nodded once. I know, and you always seemed like you had things handled. That sentence almost broke me more than the laughter ever had. Because that was the family translation of my whole life. Olivia doesn't ask. So Olivia doesn't need. Olivia doesn't fall apart. So Olivia must be fine. Olivia keeps showing up. So nobody has to show up for her. I looked at my father and kept my voice steady. That was the mistake, I said. You treated Mason's need like an investment. You treated my ambition like a warning sign. Mom made a small sound, like my words had landed somewhere deep. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wanted to reach for her. The old part of me did. The daughter who still wanted to be held, still wanted someone to say they should have seen her sooner. But I did not move. Not yet. Mason rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't know it felt like that. You didn't have to know, I said. You benefited from not knowing. Claire looked at him then. Really looked at him, and for the first time, Mason had no joke ready. The next Saturday, I took them to see the properties. I almost canceled twice. Part of me wanted to keep that world separate, clean from them, untouched by their opinions. But another part of me needed them to see the work. Not the headline, not the numbers, the work. Ruth came out before we even reached the porch of the first duplex. She was wearing gardening gloves and had a streak of soil on one cheek. Olivia, she said, smiling like I was family. The new light is perfect. I can finally see the steps at night. Mom looked at the porch light, then at me. Something shifted in her face. At the second property, Victor stood in the doorway with his arms folded. He gave Dad a careful nod, then said, "Your daughter keeps her word. That's rare." Dad did not answer right away. He just looked at the repaired gutters, the clean windows, the fresh paint around the frame. He looked at things he would have once called too much for me. Then he looked at me. At the little house near the hiking trails, Claire walked through slowly, touching the folded towels, the framed forest prints, the guest book full of neat handwriting from strangers thanking me for a peaceful weekend. "This is beautiful," she said. Mason stood behind her. Quiet, not angry, not smirking, just quiet. We ended at a coffee shop downtown, the same kind of place where I used to sit alone with spreadsheets and cheap refills, convincing myself I was not crazy for wanting more. Dad wrapped both hands around his cup. "I was wrong," he said. No speech, no excuse, just that. "I was wrong about you." My throat tightened, but I made myself breathe. "Thank you." Mom reached across the table slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. Her fingers were warm. "Can we do better?" she asked. I looked at her hand over mine, then at Dad, then at Mason. "You can?" I said. "But I'm not coming back as the daughter everyone worries about quietly and dismisses out loud. If I sit at that table, I sit there as an equal." Dad nodded. Mason did too, and maybe that was not healing. Not yet. But it was the first honest thing my family had given me in years. 3 months later, I bought property number 5. It was another small duplex. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would ever make the cover of a magazine. The paint needed work. The kitchen cabinets were old. One upstairs window stuck when it rained. But the numbers made sense, and more than that. I made sense to myself now. I still drove my old sedan for a while. Not because I had to, but because I could choose what mattered to me. That was the difference. Choice. I posted about the 5th property online with one simple line. I started with savings, silence, and one decision not to stay small. Mom commented first. "So proud of you. Sweetheart." I looked at those words for a long time. Then I tapped the little heart. Not because those words fixed everything, they didn't, but because I no longer needed them to know who I was. If your family has ever made you feel like the backup child, the quiet one, the one who should be grateful for less, I want you to hear me. You are not smaller because they failed to see you. Sometimes the strongest answer is not an argument. It is a life they can no longer deny. If this story hit something real, share your story in the comments and subscribe, because the next story may sound even closer to home.